In the early to mid 2000s, there was a craze in Western media around the emulation of the Japanese animation style. It was inoffensive at worst. Books, cartoons, games, some of these were pretty good. However, recently there has been a schism between the Western and the Eastern entertainment industry. Unfortunately, the West has been trying for some time now this wolf in sheep's clothing approach. Their methods vary from hijacking a beloved IP to lower your guard, to actually making a decent first entry, only to inject their political nonsense into it. By the way, I was right about Spider-Verse. The Gwen Stacy haircut was the first sign, but they were waiting for a sequel. Today's case is a different method. This tactic is all about presenting a product that looks Eastern, only to inject it with a modern agenda. I still maintain this claim despite contradictory evidence. At first glance, I thought that this was an Eastern project. The CGI is the only thing that gave me a hint. There's definitely a shame of animation and a lack of recognition of it as its own art form.
Well, definitely we wanted the show to look like something nobody had ever seen before. We said from the beginning, this is not going to be anime. You know, we all love anime, but we need it to be different. We need to expand our audience. We need everyone to know that this is not just for anime lovers. This is for a whole new audience. So we had to work to find that right balance and that right style. And we worked, with our supervising director, Jane Wu, and with the talents of many, many other people and the collaboration of Blue Spirit to find the right balance within our guidelines that we were provided. And
the same shame that is present in video games, this kowtowing to cinema. Despite all this, the creators go into long lengths into their favorite projects, a good number of them being Japanese, and the result speaks for itself. The creators in question are a couple, Michael Green and Ember Noizumi. The former being the writer who also worked on a couple of high-profile projects like Blade Runner 2049. Despite some of his projects being pretty good, there is a good number of slip-ups in them that take you out of the experience. You know, the typical Hollywood subversion. Even in his best work, it's there. In Haunting in Venice, Hercule Poirot gets overpowered and drowned by a middle-aged woman. In Blade Runner, Kay is a nobody and the android messiah is a woman. For the most part, he writes a lot of goy slop. I was going to focus only on him and give the benefit of the doubt to the woman. Nonetheless, with damning evidence in sight, upon further inspection, she is also to blame for a lot of the ideas. She's a half-Japanese descent who clearly harbors resentment to the culture and its lack of opening.
Amber, how did this show come about?
It only took 15 years.
Just 15 years.
The short answer is we had a baby. Much to my surprise, she had blue eyes. We started calling her our little blue eye samurai, and we're like, wait, that's a great idea. But a lot of it, came from just my mixed race background, just, kind of feeling stuck between two worlds and deciding what if we put those feelings into a world in Japan where the borders were closed, where it was so homogenous, and that era is still heralded as the golden age of Japan.
Yes, Japan is close to the rest of the world, but that's a normal human behavior. Be too open and you end up like France. Be too closed off and you become stagnant, very much like Japan was in the late 1800s. To be, something needs to be excluded, and yes, there's a way to do it without being hostile. Now, onto the exhibits. I present Exhibit A, the first of three. The filthy half-breed tried to be feminine for a while and find herself a man. She still, however, had a combative disposition. She challenged her husband to a sparring match and humiliated him. This idea that women are a danger physically to men is nonsense for the most part. Let's say I have experience in fighting, and unfortunately I have known men who were a victim of domestic abuse. Sexual dimorphism has made men stronger. When men fight, they agree to not go too hard on each other unless stated otherwise. There's also certain places you don't hit. The back of the head, for example, as it would make you handicapped, blind, or deaf. Even the Greek agreed to not hit a man who was running away from battle because he was probably going to go back to tend his field and help his family survive. I've always hated this idea that fighters can't fight in the streets. Even the Greeks had rules of engagement. The only problem in the streets is that people who lose might come back with 10 of their friends because they know they're not strong enough, and a couple of baseball bats. When the rules of engagement are broken, disaster ensues. Women don't understand for the most part because they've never been in these situations. Men really do hold back out of kindness and honor. When they don't, you end up like Clarissa Shields. Clarissa is a really strong boxer, and she even does MMA now. She's capable, but she struggles with guys early into their boxing career, or nobodies. That guy from Western Europe is good, but I've never heard of him. She's one of the strongest women, and that's why I use her as an example. Even the strongest gets washed by a guy that would struggle if he went up against the male equivalent. That left hook is what happens in real life. Men don't hit women because of the damage we can do, but if you hit us back with intention, it still means something. Even children who use physical violence will be warned and punished. It's not about being scared, it's about being scared that you get hurt. The only moment physical harm can come to us is if you use tools while we try to hold back, or if the man in question really has no experience in combat. Johnny Depp vs. Chris Cyborg would be interesting. Exhibit B. Of course, every man in this show is stupid, evil, crippled, or a combination of the three. That includes Exhibit A. The only healthy relationship in the show turns into a bait and switch where the woman leaves the man she loves to become great, quote unquote. Women are told that they want to be great by modern messaging, when in reality they simply want to build and nurture a good social environment. Even men want to be great, but only because it benefits their loved ones. This is a classic inversion of roles, and it's implied she's going to try to climb the social ladder. She exudes this girl boss energy that leads nowhere. The game plan for a woman is not the same as a man, and modernity would have you believe that it is. They want women to believe that they're bad because they're not trying to do the same as men. I agree that her new marriage was not ideal. I respect that she tried to find her old husband, but you can see she was way over her head. When left alone in nature, she didn't fight. She couldn't. She tried. She had to resort to faking her way through prostitution. The women in this show ignore every warning, but somehow make it through. But that doesn't happen in real life. You just eat the consequences. There's a way for women to make it, and that's not it. I also wanted to briefly focus on the butler character. Probably the only one who understood that the situation of the princess was not easy, and that there are things greater than her. And he suddenly changes his mind and dies by the end. Exhibit C. She really hates that she's a half-breed. We know it's a self-insert of the author and her daughter. This might seem appropriate. The Japanese to this day are not fond of half-breeds. There is a story to be told here about the natural inclination of humans, in this case the Japanese, to want in-group homogeneity. It's what makes a society stable but also stagnant. Despite this, I can't ignore the context of this being written by a culturally white, clearly liberal-leaning couple on Netflix and the Western world. Just like Miami is an excuse to have an unrealistic number of black people in GTA 6, this is an excuse to hate on not just the white, but also the Japanese people. Let's have a quick exercise. Could you imagine this being any other ethnic group? Let's say Africa during the Rwanda genocide. Could you imagine anyone, especially if they're white or part white, making a story about someone saying how much he hates the Hutu? The white man in this is cartoonishly evil, and by extension, so is the Japanese, because at this point Asians are white. Both ethnicity are portrayed as evil with no value. The only Japanese who are not evil are handicapped. Get that oppression totem out of here. I'm not saying you can't criticize the system or its people, but the critic seems distorted through the lens of politics. Again, you would never be the best warrior in a male-dominated world. Even in an era where men are at their weakest, women struggle, not just in fighting, but in all physical disciplines. Yes, getting married off doesn't seem great, but it's for the greater good even though they present it as being comically evil. And like all feminist talking points, it's probably exaggerated. In feudal Japan, you would be better off living in a castle, and if you want to talk about the social norms of such way of life, everything has a trade-off. The show in general wants to believe that it's more than what it is, when in reality it's just peddling nonsensical worldviews. In reality, none of this happens, or not for the reason they think they do. If you veer off from reality, you have to give a plausible explanation. Superman flies because he's a Kryptonian. There's nothing plausible here. Mizu is impossibly better than everyone else. There's things that don't make sense. If you flick teeth in a person's face, it doesn't puncture their eye. That happened in real life, and it's not the same thing. And the setting is not fantastical enough to justify such things. Most of the show is not credible, and it tries to seduce you through the veil of Eastern media when it's not really Eastern at its heart. It's made by New Yorkers. There's definitely talented people in there, but don't let the veneer distract you from what it is. Another bait and switch. Despite all its effort and artistry, I can't quite recommend the show.